Hey, it's Shannon from the Trinisphere, where Timmy, Johnny, and Spike battle over all things EDH. Today we're going to take a stab at upgrading the Brawl precons into full-fledged EDH decks by adding $25 worth of ads. Before I dive into this deck list, like if you enjoy budget upgrade primers like this, and subscribe if you want to get notifications when the Timmy and Spike come out with their upgrade primers, or when the gameplay using this list comes out next. So today we're going to talk about upgrading Korvold Fae-Cursed King. This is a 5-mana Jund 4/4 Dragon Noble with flying. When he enters the battlefield or attacks, we must sacrifice another permanent, but whenever we sacrifice a permanent, we put a +1/+1 counter on him and draw a card. So he's more like a 5-mana 5/5 flying that draws us a card when he enters the battlefield, but we must sack an irrelevant permanent. So as a Johnny, we're going to look for a way to go infinite with this guy. We're going to look for ways to exploit his downside and synergize with his triggered abilities. So the first thing that comes to mind, and this may be no surprise to people who've seen some of my other deck techs, is going to be the card Mortuary. This 4-mana enchantment says whenever any creature is put into our graveyard from the battlefield, we put that creature on top of our library. So this pet card of mine is usually used in combos in which we have sack engines, draw effects based off our creature's deaths, as well as damage effects based off of our creature's deaths. For example, if we have Carrion Feeder in play with Mortuary, Carrion Feeder could sacrifice itself to its own ability, triggering Mortuary to put Carrion Feeder on top of our library. And then if we had another triggered effect, like for example Grim Haruspex, we would then draw the Carrion Feeder back to our hand. This effectively allows us to put Carrion Feeder into play and sacrifice Carrion Feeder as many times as we can afford to pay this mana cost. Then if we have another effect like a Blood Artist, we could drain our opponents for as much mana as we could afford. So this isn't by any means a powerful combo, but it is a fun, unique one that people don't usually see. So what Korvold brings to the table is he effectively replaces one of those pieces. He puts a Grim Haruspex into our command zone, meaning we have access to him at all times. Because there's an effect that says whenever we sacrifice a permanent, we draw a card, Mortuary looping is going to be a little bit easier to do now. So to support the Mortuary combo, we're going to need sack engines. Things that can sacrifice our creatures repeatedly, preferably without a mana cost or a tap. That way we can do it as many times as we want in a turn. For that, we said we have Carrion Feeder, but we also have Falkenrath Aristocrat, Prosh Sky Raider of Care, and Viscera Seer. The cool thing about all 4 of these cards is they can sacrifice themselves as well as other creatures. The deck does come with other sack engines, but they are not infinite repeatable, but they still generate pretty good value. We have Blood-Soaked Altar, Chittering Witch, Gluttonous Troll, and Priest of Forgotten Gods. So a smattering of creature creation, removal, and draw power. And then it's rounded out by Witch's Oven, which produces food, which is good because we can sack food to trigger Korvold's ability a second time. So now that we have a lot of ways to sack things to trigger Mortuary to put back on top of our library, and then our Korvold to draw those cards back to our hands, how do we get ahead of our opponents? We need some cards that generate extra synergies based off of sack. And we didn't even need to add any because this deck came with plenty. This deck has Judith, the Scourge Diva, Mayhem Devil, Sir Conrad the Grim, and Vindictive Vampire. So all 4 of these are damaging effects based off of our creature deaths. So if we start looping Carrion Feeder, we now can just effectively pay a black mana to drain our opponents for 1 life or deal 1 damage to random targets. Sir Conrad has the bonus effect of not only triggering when our creature dies, but also triggering when our creature leaves our graveyard to be put on top of our library. Lastly, an additional powerful combo piece is Pitiless Plunderer. This 4-mana 1/4 human pirate says whenever a creature we control dies, we create a treasure. So this actually gives us the ability to go infinite with Carrion Feeder or Viscera Seer. When Mortuary is in play, we can sacrifice Carrion Feeder to itself, which will trigger Pitiless Plunderer to create a treasure. Mortuary will trigger to put Carrion Feeder back on top of our library, and Korvold will trigger to let us draw Carrion Feeder from our library back to our hand. Now that we can use that treasure from Pitiless Plunderer to replay our Carrion Feeder, and then repeat this loop infinitely. An additional bonus is that Pitiless Plunderer's treasure, when we sack that for mana, also triggers Korvold. So we're drawing extra cards in this loop, and Korvold is growing twice as fast. Not to mention if we have something like a Mayhem Devil in play, we can do infinite damage to an infinite number of targets. Outside of the combo, we're still going to have tons of extra bodies and body generators. We have Angrath, Captain of Chaos, Dreadhorde Invasion, Kranko, Tin Street Kingpin, and Orzhov Enforcer. All cards that can generate extra bodies, and some of which can be sacked and replace themselves very easily. We're going to add to this deck Death Render, Pawn of Ulamog, Reassembling Skeleton, and Sifter of Skulls. Deathrender is another pet card of mine. This 4-mana equipment gives equipped creature +2/+2, and it costs 2 to equip. So not a very good combat-based equipment, but it has an awesome triggered ability that says whenever equipped creature dies, you may put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield and attach Deathrender to it. This allows us to tear through our deck, especially with a draw engine like Korvold in play. When we're sacking things to trigger Deathrender, we're putting creatures from our hand into play, and then we're drawing more creatures. We can churn through a dozen creatures very quickly, triggering a ton of effects, whether they be those creatures entering the battlefield or other effects from those creatures dying. Pawn of Willamog and Citrus Skulls, similar to Pitiless Plunderer, effectively generate mana whenever our creatures die. They create those Eldrazi spawns and scions which can be sacked for colorless mana, but those Eldrazi spawns and scions have additional benefit in this deck in that when you sacrifice them for mana, they trigger Korvold to draw cards. So with Korvold in play, we're drawing cards when we sack any old creature, then Pawn or Sifter is triggering to generate another body that can be sacked to draw another card. And of course, Reassembling Skeleton needs no introduction. He can be sacked a bunch of times during the game, and we can just put him right back into play. Some non-creature sack fodder that we can generate include Brass's Bounty, Golden Egg, Rapacious Dragon, and Savvy Hunter. So these all generate treasures or food, which will be a great way to draw cards through Korvold and increase Korvold into lethal commander damage out of nowhere. Now on to our ramp removal and draw. Since Korvold is 5 mana, it is important that we ramp. This deck of course comes with the awesome Arcane Signet, as well as the decent Leyline Prowler and Paradise Druid. But we're going to supplement it with Edge of Autumn, Harrow, Spring Bloom Druid, and Yavimaya Granger. You can see here that we focused on all kinds of ramp that have sacrifices attached to them. Harrow and Spring Bloom Druid effectively ramp us by 1, but they sack a land in doing so we can get that extra additional benefit from Korvold. Edge of Autumn can be cycled late game, and Yavimaya Granger has echoes. We can just opt to not pay that cost, so it sacrifices itself in the next upkeep. We break our removal up into mass removal, non-creature removal, and spot removal. For mass, we have Find and Finality, Flashback Marauder, Plague Crafter, and Taste of Death. So these are a little indiscriminate, hitting various things across the board, but I like Flashback and Plague Crafter here because of course they generally speaking sacrifice themselves to trigger Korvold. For non-creature removal, we have Cindervines, Ingot Chewer, Seal of Primordium, and Thrashing Brontodon. Seal of Primordium and Cindervines kind of act like an onboard Naturalize that has a sacrifice trigger attached to him. Ingot Chewer is pretty cool because of course when we evoke him, he gets sacrificed immediately, but he still gets that nice smelt effect. Additionally, for mass removal, we're going to run Wave of Vitriol. This 7-mana sorcery says each player sacrifices all artifacts, enchantments, and non-basic lands they control. And then for each land sacrificed this way, they get to search out a basic and put it into play tapped. So normally this is the kind of a card you have to build around in your own deck. You don't want to end up blowing yourself out, but in the case of Korvold, that's great. We just get to draw a bunch more cards if we end up blowing up a bunch of our own lands, artifacts, and enchantments. This will also help hopefully knocking the Knight deck and the artifact and enchantment-centric Faerie deck into submission. For spot removal, we have Bake into a Pie, Death Sprout, Goblin Cratermaker, and Thorn Mammoth. We didn't really need to add much here because it had a good set of options, and I'm excited to see Thorn Mammoth do a Apex Allosaurus impression. Onto our draw power. The deck came with a Keeper of Fables and a Moldervine Reclamation, the latter of which I'm excited to be using, but we're going to supplement that with a couple interesting pieces here. We're going to run Evolutionary Leap, Smothering Abomination, and Uvenwald Mysteries. Evolutionary Leap doubles as a sack engine as well as a way to replace creatures with draw. Smothering Abomination draws a card the same way Korvold does, and Uvenwald Mysteries gives us treasures which can then be sacked to trigger Korvold a second time, as well as giving us bodies when we do so. The final spicy card that we're going to be running is Dragon Appeasement. This is a 6-mana Jund enchantment that says skip your draw step, and whenever you sacrifice a creature, you may draw a card. So this is basically an overcosted Smothering Abomination, but it's an enchantment form, which means it's going to be much harder for our opponents to remove. This card is by no means good. If it were reprinted today, it would probably be around 3 mana instead of 6. The downside of skipping our draw step is extremely high risk. If they're able to blow up all of our creatures while this is in play, and we're no longer able to sack anything, we can effectively lock ourselves out of the game. But what more Johnny of a card can I think of than one that is high risk, medium reward, and that almost no one is going to remember from playing Alar Reborn block. Also, there's tons of flavor here. Come on, we're appeasing Korvold. There's a flavor victory to be had here. Moving on to supplement our draw, we have our Recursion, Blood for Bones, Golgari Finebroker, and Whisper Blood Liturgist give us the option to recur some of those creatures we're sacrificing, and even in some cases, our Seal of Primordium and Cindervines to naturalize a second time. The deck does come with a +1/+1 counter package, but it's not something we're emphasizing here. It includes Evolution Sage, Pollen Bright Druid, Rhythm of the Wild, and Woodland Champion. +1 encounters is a different build that we go towards entirely. We could focus on proliferating and growing all of our creatures to enormous size very quickly, because of course Korvold does grow whenever we sacrifice a permanent. This could be effectively like turning Korvold into the commander of a Devour deck. However, this is more of a Timmy approach in my opinion, just trying to grow our creatures enough to deal combat damage kills. And we're more focused on a Johnny approach, using obscure combo pieces to go infinite. My final spicy adds to this list include Captivating Crew and Mob Rule. There's nothing more flavorful to me than using Captivating Crew to Shanghai an opponent's creature and then feed him to our venerable leader. Mob Rule acts like a cheap insurrection, allowing us to grab a large majority of creatures in the battlefield. And then of course we can feed the most dangerous one to Korvold while we crunch our opponents with the rest. Last but not least, I'll talk about some lands I added to the deck, including Blighted Woodland, Ghost Quarter, and Jund Panorama. Of course, we're just going to add some lands that can sacrifice themselves for additional value, and then we're going to fill the rest out with additional basics. Alright, that wraps up this upgrade primer, turning Korvold Fae-Cursed King into a combo loop using Mortuary. Having a Grim Haruspex in our command zone definitely makes the combo easier to pull off, and even mostly attainable in this budget list. We may not be able to go infinite without the benefit of having Phyrexian Altar and the backup of having Gravecrawler. Even if we're only able to iterate through Mortuary looping 4 or 5 times a turn, we're going to bury our opponents in value and burn down their best creatures with our Mayhem Devil. That's a wrap, guys. Let me know what you think. Are there other obscure combos that you would rather build Korvold around? If you're looking for a more efficient list or a more aggressively powered list, be sure to check out Spike's Alayla upgrade primer, as well as Timmy's Sir Gwen upgrade primer. But remember to like this video if you want us to make more budget-oriented upgrade primers like this, and be sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon to get notifications when the gameplay using this list comes out soon. Shannon the Johnny signing off. Great minds brew alike. Wow, what a great video that was. My favorite part was the thing with the cards. If you enjoyed that video, you can support the Trinisphere by using our affiliate links when you go to buy cards from tcgplayer.com. Using our affiliate links means that TCG Player will donate a portion of their cut to us whenever you buy a card from them. All you need to do is follow that link to the site, and then you can go ahead and shop as normal and then check out. And everything will be handled by TCG Player. No need to enter a code or any of that nonsense. So you can help Juan keep churning out those budget deck lists, Hogg overcome his rock addiction, and me, Shannon, keep well stocked with Red Bulls for these late night editing sessions. Many thanks from us at the Trinisphere. Catch you later.